So talks aimed at setting a new European Union budget have broken up without agreement. The Prime Minister said a deal was still doable, but more savings must be found. EU institutions, he said, had to adjust to the real world. In the end, he claimed Germany and other countries, all net contributors to the EU budget, had supported Britain's calls for tougher spending curbs. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is in Brussels now. Gary.
Well, it's not a great day for Europe, but by comparison with a few recent ones, it's hardly the worst. They haven't actually fallen out as badly as they can, and we do know about that, don't we? As you said, for David Cameron, a fairly good day. He leaves here proclaiming that he's not isolated. That was a serious threat before he came here, that it could have been 26 against 1. But there is no deal, so there still holds out the option that he could be ambushed before there is a deal. Some of his support might fall away. He can't be sure until the whole thing is signed. We may have to wait until next year for that. But I think he leaves here a pretty happy person.
They were mainly kept apart for the 2 days they were here to keep things from overheating. For the short period they shared a room, Europe's leaders spent a lot of the time arguing about whether to carry on arguing. In the end, they decided to break up these talks and try to do the deal another day. But by EU standards, the blame game rhetoric was relatively subdued, and David Cameron avoided being isolated 1 against 26, a scenario that had looked possible in the run-up to this summit.
On this issue of the budget, I think it's been very heartening that, as well as myself arguing for significant reductions and being on the side of taxpayers, the Swedes and the Dutch have made very strong representations too. And I think attempts there might have been to try and, well, let's just put the British in a box over there and try and do a deal without them. That didn't work.
A mighty relief that. Another major summit with Britain isolated as it was in December last year, and British diplomats worried it might confirm suspicions on the continent that Britain was sliding out of Europe. In the end, the man who tries to mediate between the European members, European Council President Herman Van Rompuy, couldn't come up with a budget that kept both the net recipient countries and the richer net contributor countries happy.
There is no need to dramatise. These budget negotiations are so complex, they generally takes 2 goes.
David Cameron said EU leaders were to blame themselves as they'd failed to slash their own pet projects like cross-border transport and energy. And he attacked EU Commission President Barroso for failing to offer up any cuts from his own staff.
Brussels continues to exist as if it is in a parallel universe.
He attacked the expat allowance, claimable even after you've lived in Brussels for 30 years. He attacked the generous final salary pension deals and said the EU should raise the retirement age for its officials, saving billions.
Frankly, the idea that the EU institutions are unwilling to even consider these sorts of changes is insulting to European taxpayers.
France's President Hollande led a popular charge against Britain's rebate, and David Cameron can't be sure he's seen off all threats to his position until a new deal is actually signed.
Well, let's go to Gary live now. Well, is David Cameron right to claim he's got lots of friends in Europe?
Well, he's got some, and he's avoided that absolute terror that he alluded to there about being pushed into a box of 1. The Swedes and the Dutch were beside him, and he'll want them to jolly well stay there all the way to the final negotiation. And very importantly, and he was very attuned to this, Chancellor Merkel called in the German press earlier in the day and more or less said to her, I paraphrase, but people need to not pick on David Cameron. She sort of threw a protective cloak around him for these talks. At least, and suggested, as I think everybody comes away from this summit thinking, that this was a bigger dispute between recipient countries, contributor countries, with the European Commission in the middle, not really quite sure how to broker a deal between those 2 sides.
And is a deal still possible, do you think, and one that satisfies David Cameron's intentions?
Yes, David Cameron pinned himself to this idea that he would only come back with a freeze, nothing more than that. He, unfortunately for him, pinned himself to a certain number. It came out from the government, a number that is quite hard to achieve. It's probably 50 billion euros less than the European Commission is currently talking about. But he's got allies, he had them in there earlier with the Swedes and the Dutch, asking for 30 billion less than the current total. So if he can get something like that, when it comes to the actual deal, he'll be a pretty happy man. But that is a big if, and meanwhile, always the possibility that his rivals reform, come back with another agenda. The rebate's still on the agenda. He doesn't like that. Of course, he's now made a bit of an enemy of the European Commission President Manuel Barroso by swinging that Thatcher handbag and clunking him on the head over administration and other costs.
Thanks, Gary.